presentation up. Today we are very lucky to have Adrian Davis. He's actually the president of Whetstone Incorporated, or Inc., and he helps small business owners and mid-sized business owners in terms of consulting and strategy and scaling up the business. So today he's going to walk us through some principles on scaling up your business, understanding what phase of business that you're in, and at this point I'm going to pass it on to Adrian.
Great. Thank you very much, Carla, and good afternoon, everybody, or perhaps morning, depending on your time zone. I'm looking forward to sharing this information with you. I've helped many small business owners and mid-sized business owners really avoid a lot of frustration in their business by helping them understand where exactly they are in the evolution of their business, what they can expect at that stage, and what they need to do to prepare for the next stage. So if I could have the next slide. So the question really is, where does your business fall in what I call the enterprise life cycle? And this is a cycle that I observed in consulting with companies, first consulting with startups, people who have basically nothing but an idea, and then consulting with some of the largest companies in the world, and just seeing the differences in organizational culture and organizational attributes as companies go through these stages. So I've developed this model, and I've been working with it over the last 6 to 8 years, refining it, and it really does help organizations understand where they are, what challenges they faced at that particular stage, and how they can prepare for the next. So we'll go through these stages, and hopefully you'll see where you are for your particular business as we go through this life cycle. And as Carla mentioned, I'll entertain some questions at the end of the presentation. If I could have the next slide, please. So the first stage, and we can go to the next slide, is what I call the entrepreneurial stage. And this really is the newborn stage of an enterprise. At the newborn stage, basically, there's really nothing except a founder with a brilliant idea. Usually this is somebody that has worked inside an organization, a large organization, and sees a need in the marketplace that is not being filled, or it's not being filled properly. They see a way that they can bring value to the marketplace. They see a way that they can fulfill a need much more expertly than the way that it is being filled today. And so with nothing more than this idea and the passion that is generated around the idea, a business is born. If I could have the next slide. And in launching this business, what is really magical is the energy that the entrepreneur brings to the enterprise. And it's because of that passion and that energy that the enterprise actually gets off the ground. And most people don't do this. And in fact, when the entrepreneur is founding the company, the spouse, the friends, maybe the bankers are usually discouraging the entrepreneur, saying, we don't think this is a good idea, we don't think this will fly. But the entrepreneur really is armed with passion. And it's that passion that drives them to launch the business and get it off the ground. Unfortunately, 80% of these businesses will fail, despite best intentions. And what I've seen is the primary reason for failure is what I call starvation. That the entrepreneur typically is not what I call a practical person. They're usually very idealistic. And because of that, they underestimate how much cash flow is required to get a business off the ground. And they underestimate how much time, how much runway they require to get a business off the ground. And so usually it takes twice as long and it costs twice as much, and they just don't have the resources. They can't get enough cash or oxygen into the business, and so the business fails. If I could have the next slide. But not all of them fail. 20% will succeed. And those that succeed move to the next stage, which I call the performing enterprise. The performing enterprise, if we were to, again, can stay with the metaphor of a human being, we have the newborn at the entrepreneurial stage. This stage is now the toddler stage. The enterprise has found its legs. It's beginning to walk. It's beginning to run. And it's a real business. So they have found their value proposition. If I could have the next slide. They found their value proposition. They're getting clear in how to articulate that value proposition. And a lot of the trial and error, that the experimentation that they were playing within the entrepreneurial stage, where we're really in the entrepreneurial stage, they would almost say yes to any request from a customer. Here in the performing stage, they have established their value, and they're beginning to see the success from their value proposition. And also they begin to say no. That when a customer asks them if they can do something, in the entrepreneurial stage, the answer is always yes. And if we can go to the next slide. Here in the performing stage, the answer is sometimes no. And it's sometimes no because the company is now looking at whether or not this enhancement or this change that the customer is asking for, whether or not it is just going to benefit that individual customer or whether or not it's going to benefit the market. If it's just going to help an individual customer, at the performing stage, the company will say no. Because now they're trying to serve a market rather than each individual customer. And so for the first time, the company is beginning to say no and focus on a value proposition to a market rather than bending over backwards for each individual customer. Now, at this stage, if we can go to the next slide, a lot of companies will actually fail at this stage, and the reason they will fail is because they are successful. It sounds paradoxical, but the more successful the performing enterprise becomes, the more at risk it becomes for failure. And in a sense, it collapses under its own weight. And it collapses under its own weight because at the performing stage, there's lots of growth. And then the company is beginning to take off. And it's able to attract what I call A players, people who they don't want to work in large corporations. They want their presence to be felt. They want their contribution to be recognized. And so they're attracted to the performing enterprise. And as they come in, these A players, through their what I call Herculean efforts, are able to take this company to exciting places. But they're running so fast that it's hard for them to stop and train others. It's easier for them to just do it themselves. Not only that, when they do stop and try and train others, the quality of the output is compromised. And so they would much rather just do it themselves, make sure that the quality is high, that it's done quickly, and it's done responsibly. Problem is, they're running so fast that as they bring on these new customers, eventually they bring on the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. There's just that one more contract that they win, that additional customer that they add, and they are just stretched too thin. And people begin to burn out. It's not fun anymore. They begin to resent it. And in fact, if one of these A players leaves the company at this critical stage, it can be catastrophic, even fatal for the company. And if I could have the next slide. And so normally what you see now is this need for organization. And this is typically where the organization will try to implement systems like CRM. And I think everybody's familiar with CRM. Stands for Creates Real Meltdowns. That I watch and I see people implement what are customer relationship management systems. And they're implementing these systems so that they can get a sense of organization around what customers are asking for, what they're implementing for customers, and just get their arms around their commitments and how they're going to deliver these commitments to their customers. But that is often a big mistake, that they're looking to the technology to solve their problems. And so they'll bring in this technology, and before they know it, the CRM is a mess, and it's not delivering the promise that they thought it would. And so what's really required here, the technology is required, but it's the shift in thinking that is much more of a necessity here. And so the performing enterprise, it will collapse because of indigestion. You know, the entrepreneurial enterprise dies from starvation. These companies at this stage will die from indigestion. They just cannot, they're scaling for a while, but then they scale too quickly, and they're not ready to perform at that level. If I could have the next slide. What is necessary, as I mentioned earlier, is a shift in thinking and a shift in culture, a shift in philosophy. And for the organization to be successful now, it must move from the performing stage to what I call the systematic stage. The systematic stage, if I could have the next slide, is really where the organization implements processes. It implements procedures. It implements policies. And these policies, procedures, processes, what they do is they stamp out chaos and they introduce repeatability. They ensure that the organization can be consistent. And this is why we see organizations like McDonald's, Starbucks, Second Cup, Bath, Bed and Beyond, all of these franchise-type systems being so successful is because they have harnessed the power of systems and the consistency of systems and the trust that creates. You know, if any of us go into any of these organizations, we know exactly where everything is going to be, and we know the experience that we're going to get. And that consistency creates trust, and that consistency enables scalability. The problem here, and if I could have the next slide, the problem with the systematic enterprise is while it's critical to implement these processes and procedures, the type of person that starts a company out of thin air, out of their imagination, they simply create from a concept. This kind of person, while they have a magic that they can bring into existence that which wasn't in existence before, they typically don't have the capability to implement systems. In fact, they don't like systems. Systems they see as constraining. And so when the company gets to this stage, what they have to do is they have to import this way of thinking. And at this stage, they can, because now they really are a going concern. And so where the company was this sort of fly-by-night baby organization, now it's beginning to grow up. Now it's a teenager. And it can attract what I call the professional managers. And the professional managers are very practical, very pragmatic people. And they typically work for large organizations, or they come from large organizations. And when they come into an organization like this, they add tremendous value because they're able to bring the procedures and the policies and the systems that put discipline and consistency in the organization. While they're doing this, however, what happens is really what they're implementing is bureaucracy. And that bureaucracy creates a hostile environment for the entrepreneurial spirit. And usually the founder and those early employees that built the business, they built it based on passion. They built it based on creativity, and they built it with an entrepreneurial spirit. Now the professional managers come in, and they begin to look under the carpets. And under the rug or under the carpet, there's all this mess and all this chaos. And so these the original founder and the original employees lose credibility. And obviously the company has outgrown them. And so the professional managers come in with all of this credibility and capability, and they basically push the original employees aside. And they say, we know how to do this. And it creates resentment, it creates conflict. If I could have the next slide. And this is the risk of the systematic enterprise. While it is highly scalable, and while it creates consistency, and that consistency is a condition for trust. If you're inconsistent, you're not trustworthy. But if you're consistent, it's a condition for trust. The danger is the company becomes impersonal. And it takes its eye off the customer, and it becomes focused internally. It's putting in CRM, it's putting in ERP, it's putting in policies, HR, different procedures, and it becomes almost completely internally focused, and it begins to take the customer for granted. The problem with that is we live in an environment or in an economy that is dynamic. It's constantly changing. It is not stable. And because of that instability, the perception of value is constantly changing. And so while we were offering something to the market yesterday, which the market valued, within 24 hours, something can happen in this very uncertain environment that causes the customers to no longer value what we're offering. The systematic enterprise is usually slow to pick up on this change. because they are so internally focused, and they end up alienating their customers. And the customers begin to see them as this big, impersonal organization that is not responsive to their needs. And they begin to move away to smaller, more nimble suppliers that really are in tune with what their needs are. If I could have the next slide. And so the key now to be successful is to move to the next stage, which I call the adaptive enterprise. And if I could have the next slide. So we've gone from the entrepreneurial, the startup, to the performing, where now we have a real business, we're delivering value, we're getting paid, but it's really built on human effort, to then getting too big to be run just on human effort, to move to now systematic, where now we have systems and processes and policies to enable us to be consistent. And also what that consistency does is we can now bring in new employees and hand them the procedure manual or put them through the training program. And so we can scale very quickly. If a critical employee leaves, it really isn't that shocking or damaging because we have the critical systems that we can bring new people in to run. But at that systematic stage, we end up losing touch with the customer because we are internally focused. To move to the adaptive stage, I mentioned earlier that the systematic stage creates conflict between the entrepreneur and the professional manager. And often what happens at the systematic stage is the professional manager pushes out the entrepreneur and takes over the business. But when that happens, what I've observed is the business really loses its soul. It loses its reason for being, and it just becomes an administrative exercise. And when the market changes, the professional manager really doesn't have the creativity to launch a new product or a new service or to innovate. And so to get to the adaptive stage, what is required really is a marriage between the entrepreneur who is focused on mission and the professional manager who is focused on margin. And when we can bring these two different mindsets together, get them to respect each other, get them to cooperate with each other, get them to collaborate with each other, that's what creates the adaptive enterprise, where we have all the discipline of systems, but we also have the creativity of the entrepreneur. And as the market shifts, the entrepreneur is able to detect that shift or that migration of value and is able to respond. And so we call that the adaptive enterprise, this ability that the organization has to build on top of its systems and its discipline and adapt to changing customer value. If I could have the next slide. And the failure here at this stage is simply that when you're adaptive, you are reactive. You're waiting for change to happen, a new competitor, a shift in customer perception, some change in the market, and then you're responding. And in such a fast-changing market, it's possible that you may not respond in time. So if I could have the next slide. The ultimate stage that business needs to get to is what I call the preemptive stage. And notice this, that to get to the adaptive stage, you have to get those two mindsets working together, where the entrepreneur and the professional manager, in a sense, get married and learn to run the business together. And when that happens, then we can move to the preemptive stage. If I could have the next slide. The preemptive stage, unlike the adaptive stage, is proactive. It is actually instigating change in the marketplace. It is changing the rules of the game and causing everybody else to respond. And the reason it can do that is because of the relationship that it has with its customers. If I could have the next slide. It is understanding how to develop deep, strategic, and what I would call symbiotic relationships with its customers. And like the entrepreneurial stage, where the entrepreneur is willing to do anything for a customer, the preemptive enterprise also has that agility and that flexibility. The difference is the preemptive enterprise has resources. The entrepreneurial enterprise often does not. And the preemptive enterprise is crystal clear about what a right fit customer looks like. The entrepreneurial enterprise is not. The entrepreneur will do anything for anybody that has a wallet, whereas the preemptive enterprise will collaborate with its best customers, with its strategic customers. And it chooses those customers carefully, it collaborates with them, and because of the closeness and the intimacy in the relationship, it understands the emerging needs, the emerging priorities, the emerging goals of its best customers. And with that knowledge of the emerging priorities of its best customers, it can anticipate where value is going. It's like Wayne Gretzky used to say that, good hockey players skate to where the puck is. The best hockey players skate to where the puck is going to be. And the preemptive enterprise navigates the organization to where value is going. And it preempts the market, and it changes the rules of the game. If I could have the next slide. So hopefully you've seen your organization at some point in this continuum, in this life cycle, and ideally what you want to do is build capability towards getting to this preemptive stage where you have the symbiotic relationship or strategic relationship with your best customers. And because of that, you can anticipate where value is going, and you can deliver new definitions and innovate to deliver new definitions of value. Next slide. So again, just to summarize, there are really 5 stages. There is the startup stage, the entrepreneurial stage, the newborn, followed by the preemptive stage, which is the toddler. Then we have the systematic stage, which is the teenager, really getting the disciplines in place, but perhaps losing touch with the customer at that stage, moving then to adaptive, where the entrepreneurial mindset and the professional manager mindset learn to work together and react to changes in the market, and then ultimately the preemptive stage, where they can proactively go after new definitions of value. And so what I'll do now is pause and do some Q&A. Also, I will let you know that I have an article that goes into more detail on these stages, and if you would like that, just send me an email.